Welcome to The Case of the Chorister's Cypher, a Sherlock Holmes adventure from the series The Lost Cases of Young Sherlock before Baker Street, playing in the year 1879. I have recently come into possession of a remarkable collection of papers from the estate of Mr. Victor Trevor, an early friend of Holmes. Comprising letters and private journal entries, they chronicle the very genesis of his methods in the years just before our fateful meeting. These are the lost cases of his youth, the challenges that shaped the man I would come to know. The first of these accounts, which I shall relate from Trevor's own detailed notes, is a curious affair he titled The Case of the Chorister's Cipher. Chapter 1. My first true glimpse into the singular methods of Sherlock Holmes came in the autumn of 1875, during our shared university days. We had lodgings together in Montague Street, and on one dreary Tuesday the London fog pressed against our window panes like a damp grey blanket. The only sounds were the steady tick of the mantelpiece clock and the intermittent hiss and pop of a chemical experiment at which Holmes busied himself at a side table. A hesitant but determined rap suddenly echoed from our front door. Holmes glanced up from his beakers, a flicker of interest cutting through the intense concentration on his sharp features. Our landlady then showed in a gentleman of advanced years, his back stooped not by age alone, but by the palpable weight of some profound sorrow. He clutched a worn felt hat in his trembling hands, his pale eyes darting about the room as if searching for an anchor in a storm. "Pray, take a seat, sir. You appear to be in some distress. I am Sherlock Holmes, and this is my friend Mr. Trevor," Sherlock Holmes responded. The old man inclined his head, his voice a reedy whisper when he finally spoke, frail as autumn leaves. "Mr. Holmes, my name is Alaric Finchley. I am the Choirmaster of King's College in Cambridge. I have been told that you possess an unusual faculty for observation," Mr. Alaric Finchley said. He recounted his tale, his voice imbued with the quiet desperation of a man who had exhausted all conventional avenues. He spoke of the hallowed choir stalls of the chapel, a place of sanctuary and history, from which an item had been stolen. His words faltered as he described how the local constabulary had listened with poorly concealed impatience before dismissing the matter entirely. His words faltered as he described how the local constabulary had listened with poorly concealed impatience before dismissing the matter entirely. "A theft from a chapel? A dreadful business, sir. Was it the collection plate? Some silver ornament, perhaps?" Victor Trevor said. "No, Mr. Trevor, nothing of monetary value. That is the difficulty. The thief took but one thing, a single page of handwritten sheet music," responded Mr. Alaric Finchley. I confess I shared the constabulary's bewilderment. But Holmes, who had been leaning back with his eyes half closed, now sat bolt upright. His entire demeanour transformed, his languor vanished, replaced by the keen, alert posture of a hound catching a fresh scent. "One page. Describe it, Mr. Finchley, in the most minute detail," deduced Sherlock Holmes. "It is singular. A 14th-century composition, though its authorship is unknown. The notation is archaic, the melody jarring. It is, to the modern ear, a profoundly dissonant piece of music. An academic curiosity, nothing more. But to me, to the chapel's history, it is irreplaceable, Mr. Alaric Finchley said. His voice broke on the final word. While I felt a profound pity for the old man, Holmes was already on his feet, pacing before the fireplace, his eyes alight with a fire that was anything but sympathetic. Precisely. Dissonant, you say, unpleasant, of no value to a collector, nor a musician, nor a common thief. Nothing else was disturbed, no prayer books disarranged, no candlesticks touched, replied Sherlock Holmes. Nothing, sir. The chapel was exactly as it had been left, said Mr. Alaric Finchley. Therein lies the entire case, Trevor, do you not see? The police are looking for a motive they understand, greed, but the facts deny that motive entirely. When a crime has been committed for which there is no conventional explanation, we must seek an unconventional one. This is not theft, it is an extraction. The page was not taken for what it is, but for what it does, declared Sherlock Holmes. He turned back to our visitor, his voice now imbued with a strange, vibrant energy that instilled in the old choirmaster a glimmer of hope. Mr. Finchley, your problem is of the most fascinating nature. It is a three-pipe problem, I believe. Dismiss the Cambridge constabulary from your mind. You now have my complete and undivided attention, deduced Sherlock Holmes. As Mr. Finchley departed, his spirit renewed. Holmes was already lost in a cloud of tobacco smoke and intense speculation. I knew then, with absolute certainty, that our quiet academic life was over, and my friend was embarking upon a mystery far deeper than a simple case of stolen paper. Though I was not to accompany Holmes on his initial journey to Cambridge, he recounted its every detail to me upon his return, with such precision that I can picture him now. I see him seated alone in the second-class carriage, the rhythmic clatter of the wheels on the rails, a percussive accompaniment to his thoughts. The grime of London was swiftly left behind, replaced by the rolling green of the home counties, a placid scene that I am certain my friend barely registered. His gaze, fixed upon the rattling window-pane, was turned inward, focused on a far more intricate landscape. The problem presented by the distraught choirmaster, Mr. Alaric Finchley, was precisely the sort of intellectual grit upon which Holmes's mind thrived. The local constabulary had seen a petty theft of paper. Holmes saw a direct challenge to logic. He began, as he so often did in those earlier days, by speaking his thoughts aloud, the carriage his temporary stage, and the passing fields his silent audience. A single sheet of music. Its value? Negligible. Not a shilling at any market in England. So, why risk capture? Our thief is clearly no common housebreaker who seeks gold, silver, negotiable bonds, replied Sherlock Holmes. He rose from his seat then, his lean frame pacing the narrow confines of the compartment, a restless pendulum of thought. The hiss of steam from the engine punctuated his movements. His mind, I knew, was eliminating the impossible, constructing from the barest of facts the skeleton of a most unusual man. So, the value is not monetary. It must be specific. Could it be personal? A memento? Unlikely. Finchley's grief was genuine, but it was the grief of a curator, not a man robbed of a priceless heirloom. No, this points to function. The thief has a purpose for this music that no other soul on earth could conceive. He must know something of the chapel itself, something hidden, stated Sherlock Holmes. He fell silent, his eyes finally focusing on the world outside. The landscape had begun to flatten, the trees growing sparse as the great damp expanse of the fens stretched towards the horizon under a vast leaden sky. The very air hung heavy, expectant. It was here that Holmes's thoughts took their most audacious leap, from the culprit to the crime's unique theatre, King's College Chapel. That magnificent fan vaulting, a marvel of engineering. I have always thought it is not merely a ceiling, but a musical instrument in its own right. The architects must have understood resonance, harmonics. Finchley called the stolen music dissonant, an ugly composition. But what if its purpose is not to be beautiful? What if it is not music at all, but a formula, a set of acoustic instructions? A key, perhaps, not for a lock of brass and steel, but one of stone and air. Sherlock Holmes responded. A long, mournful cry from the engine's whistle sliced across the fens as the train's frantic rhythm began to subside. The first outlying buildings of Cambridge appeared, their grey stone stark against the lowering heavens. Holmes ceased his pacing and took his seat, his expression one of calm, predatory readiness. He had his hypothesis. Now all that remained was to descend into the field of battle, where I had no doubt a thoroughly unimpressed local constable would be waiting to greet him. Our arrival in Cambridge was met not by the peal of collegiate bells, but by a damp, persistent drizzle that seemed to cling to the ancient stone of the college fronts. The air, thick with the scent of wet earth and river water, was a world away from the familiar coal-smoke haze of London. As our cab rattled to a halt before the imposing gatehouse of King's College, I saw a figure waiting for us, his stout form silhouetted against the grey light. As our cab rattled to a halt before the imposing gatehouse of King's College, I saw a figure waiting for us, his stout form silhouetted against the grey light. He was a man of considerable girth, his uniform stretched taut across his chest, and his face, ruddy and weathered, seemed set in a permanent expression of dour scepticism. The rhythmic crunch of his heavy boots on the gravel was the only sound as he drew near. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I must confess, sir, I am somewhat surprised. For a man of your reputation, you seem rather young to be travelling all this way for what amounts to little more than student mischief," responded Constable Grimshaw. His voice was a low rumble, thick with a local accent, and devoid of any deference. He looked my friend up and down, his gaze lingering for a moment on Holmes's lean frame and intense expression. It is often the seemingly trivial events that conceal the most fascinating problems, Constable. I am not here at the behest of Scotland Yard, but on my own account. I find the specific nature of the stolen article to be of singular interest, observed Sherlock Holmes. "Singular interest," Constable Grimshaw said. The constable let out a short, humourless sound, a rough noise of dismissal from the back of his throat. "It is a page of music, Mr. Holmes, a page of discordant scribbles, according to the choirmaster. Some young gentleman, full of spirits after a night at the taverns, likely snatched it for a lark. We'll find it lining a bird cage, or used to light a pipe before the week is out. A complete waste of good police time, if you ask me, Constable Grimshaw replied. And yet nothing else was touched. A thief acting on drunken impulse is rarely so precise. Pray, lead the way. I am most eager to see the chapel for myself, deduced Sherlock Holmes. With a long-suffering sigh, Grimshaw turned and led us across the vast expanse of the front court. The rain had softened to a mist. Through it the chapel rose before us, a titan of stone and glass. It seemed less a building than a geological feature, a cliff face of perpendicular Gothic architecture soaring into the low-hanging clouds. Its sheer scale was humbling, and even the constable's grumbling fell silent as we approached the great south porch. He pushed open a small, heavy oak door set within the larger one, its iron hinges groaning in protest. The air that flowed out to meet us was cool and still. It carried a silence so profound it seemed to have a physical weight. The drizzling sounds of the outside world were instantly extinguished, replaced by a vast, echoing emptiness that swallowed all other noise. Well, here it is, the scene of the great crime. The choir stalls are just ahead, through the screen, remarked Constable Grimshaw. But Holmes did not move. He stood upon the threshold, his head tilted back. His keen grey eyes traced the impossible, delicate tracery of the fan-vaulted ceiling high above. He seemed oblivious to the constable and the supposed crime, utterly captivated by the architecture itself. It is magnificent, Watson. Not merely a roof, but an instrument. Do you feel it? The entire structure is tuned, designed to capture and amplify sound with perfect clarity, Sherlock Holmes noted. An instrument for what, sir? Catching dust? Constable Grimshaw answered. The constable's attempt at wit fell flat in the cavernous space. Holmes lowered his gaze, his eyes shining with a sudden, fierce light as he fixed them upon the policeman. For resonance, Constable. You see a prank. I see a lock of immense complexity. Our thief did not steal a song for amusement. He has stolen the key. A key made not of metal, but of music. Now, let us go and examine the mechanism from which it was taken, Sherlock Holmes responded. The great door of King's College Chapel closed behind us, its heavy boom echoing into the vastness before being swallowed by an immense and profound silence. The scorn of Constable Grimshaw and the clamour of the Cambridge streets vanished as if they had never been. Before us, a forest of stone pillars soared upwards, branching into the most exquisite fan-vaulting I had ever laid eyes upon. The air was cool and still, thick with the scent of cold stone and beeswax, and weighted with centuries of prayer. It was a silence so complete it pressed in, less like an absence of sound and more like a palpable presence in its own right. Beside me, Mr. Alaric Finchley, the elderly choirmaster, wrung his hands, his slight frame seeming all the more fragile in the cavernous space. His breath was a shallow, anxious whisper. It was here, Mr. Holmes, from my own lectern in the choir stalls. An irreplaceable piece of our heritage simply vanished, responded Mr. Alaric Finchley. He gestured with a trembling hand towards the rows of dark, intricately carved oak. But Holmes, to my surprise, paid the spot no immediate heed. His gaze was not directed downwards at the scene of the crime, but upwards, tracing the celestial geometry of the ceiling. His sharp, hawk-like features tilted, catching the light pouring through the great stained-glass windows. He took a dozen paces into the centre of the chancel, his boot heels clicking with unnerving clarity on the flagstones. Then he stopped. With a sudden, sharp motion that made me start, he clapped his hands together once. The report was like a pistol shot, a single crack that refused to die. It reverberated, splitting into 1,000 phantom whispers that chased one another through the stone ribs of the vaulting above. A cascade of sound that took a full 10 seconds to fade back into the oppressive quiet. "Sir, is something amiss?" replied Mr. Alaric Finchley. The choirmaster's voice was laced with utter confusion. Holmes turned, a strange, energetic light in his eyes. "On the contrary, Mr. Finchley, everything is precisely as it should be. This chapel is not merely a building, it is an instrument, a colossal, perfectly tuned resonator of stone and glass. Do you feel it? The air itself is alive," replied Sherlock Holmes. Ignoring the Choirmaster's baffled expression, Holmes finally approached the choir stalls. He did not stoop to search for footprints or fibres, as I had expected. Instead, he ran his long, thin fingers over the carved wood, a touch both delicate and probing. He tapped it gently here and there, his head cocked, as if listening for some subtle reply. He then produced a low, steady hum, a perfect B-flat, and I felt the vibration of it in the very air as he seemed to track its thrumming journey through the ancient oak. "The thief disturbed nothing else, you say? No collection boxes, no silver candlesticks, no priceless hymnals? Nothing whatsoever. It is the most perplexing part. He took only that single sheet of music, a piece of no monetary value to anyone but a scholar," Mr. Alaric Finchley replied. Holmes stood straight and fixed the old man with a gaze of singular intensity. His voice, when he spoke, was low and clear, cutting through the chapel's silence with surgical precision. "Because your thief was not a scholar, nor was he a common pilferer. He came here not to steal an object, but to acquire a piece of information. Tell me, sir, this perfect silence, is it always so? A pin dropped in this chancel would sound like a blacksmith's hammer. Any intrusion would be a cacophony. The thief, therefore, must have known exactly where he was going and what he was taking, to have operated with such silent impunity," Sherlock Holmes said. He paused, his mind clearly working at a furious pace. He paced away from the stalls and back again, his eyes darting from the floor to the vaulted ceiling, connecting points that I could not begin to perceive. "The key to this affair is not the empty space on that lectern. It is the nature of what filled it. Mr. Finchley, I must trouble you. The melody is of no importance, but the specific sequence of notes, their arrangement, is everything. You must describe this stolen music to me from memory," stated Sherlock Holmes. From the profound, echoing silence of King's College Chapel, we were ushered into the cramped and cluttered study of its choirmaster, Mr. Alaric Finchley. The contrast could not have been more pronounced. Here the air was thick with the scent of aging paper and beeswax, and the grand silence of the chapel was replaced by the dry ticking of a mantel clock and the faint rustle of papers disturbed by our entry. Mr. Finchley, a man whose frame seemed as brittle as the ancient manuscripts piled upon his desk, sank into a worn leather chair, his hands trembling slightly as he gestured for us to be seated. "Mr. Finchley, I must trouble you, though I see the affair has taken its toll. I do not wish to know of the paper's value, nor of its history. I wish for you to describe the music itself. Can you recall it?" explained Sherlock Holmes. The Choirmaster looked up, his pale eyes clouded with a deep and personal sorrow. A faint, dry sob escaped his lips before he spoke, his voice a reedy whisper. "Recall it? Mr. Holmes, that composition has been a thorn in the side of my predecessors for a century. It is seared into the memory of every choirmaster who has had the misfortune to study it. It is, to put it plainly, an abomination," answered Mr. Alaric Finchley. Holmes leaned forward, his own voice dropping to a more gentle, encouraging tone. The intensity in his grey eyes, however, did not diminish. "An abomination? Pray, describe its particular failings," remarked Sherlock Holmes. "It possesses no melody, none whatsoever. It is a sequence of jarring intervals, a discordant progression that defies every rule of harmony. To attempt to sing it is to produce a sound frankly agonizing to the ear. It is musically worthless, a mere historical curiosity, and a blight upon the very notion of composition." Mr. Alaric Finchley replied. As Finchley spoke, I saw a familiar spark ignite in Holmes's expression. It was the look he wore when a seemingly impassable fog of confusion suddenly parted, revealing the clear and logical path that had been hidden from view. He sat back in his chair, a thin smile touching his lips. "Worthless, you say, and yet someone has gone to considerable risk to acquire it, leaving behind items of actual monetary value. Does that not strike you as peculiar?" deduced Sherlock Holmes. "I confess, it struck me as the act of a madman, but Holmes clearly saw something else entirely. He turned to me, his voice sharp and incisive once more, all trace of gentleness gone. "You see, Watson, we have been proceeding upon a false premise. We have searched for a motive of musical appreciation, or perhaps for a complex cipher hidden within the notes. Mr. Finchley has just provided us with the most crucial piece of evidence yet. The music was never intended for human ears," stated Sherlock Holmes. "Not for ears? Then for what purpose, Holmes?" commented Dr. John Watson. "For the chapel itself. It is not a song, my dear fellow. It is a set of instructions. A key, not of metal to turn a lock, but of sound to resonate with stone," Sherlock Holmes said. Before I could process this astonishing declaration, a sudden commotion arose from the corridor outside. A flurry of loud, argumentative voices, accompanied by the heavy tread of several boots, grew rapidly closer. The sound was an unwelcome intrusion into the quiet sanctum of the office. A sharp, peremptory knock rattled the door in its frame, making the old childmaster jump in his seat. We found ourselves convened in a drab meeting-room at the constabulary, a place where the air hung heavy with the scent of stale kink, damp wool, and old pipe smoke. A low fire hissed in the grate, its feeble warmth struggling against the pervasive chill of the stone walls, a chill that seemed to seep into one's very bones. Opposite us sat 3 university dons, their faces alight with self-satisfaction. They had styled themselves the Dilettante Detectives Club, a name that caused a flicker of profound weariness in Holmes's grey eyes. Constable Grimshaw, looking rather impressed, sat at the head of the table, whilst in a shadowed corner, observing all with a quiet intensity, was Professor Alistair Finch, a man whose formidable intellect Holmes held in rare esteem. "After considerable analysis, Mr. Holmes, we have cracked the Choirmaster's code. It is not music at all, you see, but a rather ingenious variant of the Polybius square, keyed to the liturgical calendar of 1441. The dissonant notes are merely nulls, intended to confuse the uninitiated," answered Dr. Abernathy. He pushed a sheet of paper across the table, the dry rasp of it loud in the expectant quiet. It was a chaotic grid of numbers and letters. Holmes did not so much as glance at the chaotic grid. His gaze remained fixed upon the doctor's face, an expression of polite, almost surgical interest, betraying no hint of his thoughts. "A conspiracy, then? A secret message from the past?" remarked Constable Grimshaw. "Precisely. A treasure map, we believe, hidden by Lancastrian loyalists. The complexity is staggering, the work of a genius," Dr. Abernathy replied. "Your genius, Doctor, has overlooked a single salient fact," Sherlock Holmes noted. Abernathy blinked, his confidence wavering for the first time. A heavy silence descended, broken only by the hiss of the fire, as Holmes allowed his words to sink in before continuing. "You have presumed the author's primary intent was to hide a message. You have built an elaborate house of cards upon this single assumption. But you have ignored the testimony of the one man who knows the document, Mr. Finchley. He described the work not as complex, but as ugly, as dissonant and unmelodious, an unpleasant sequence of sounds. Does that suggest a mind carefully crafting a cipher, or one crafting a tool for a very specific, non-musical purpose?" The dons exchanged uncertain glances, the smug certainty draining from their faces. The logical simplicity of Holmes's argument had deflated their grand theory like a pricked balloon. He leaned back in his chair, the slight creak of the wood echoing in the sudden, heavy silence. "You have searched for meaning in the ink, gentlemen, when the meaning lies in the vibration of air the ink describes. It is not a map to be read, but a key to be sung. You have my thanks for your intellectual exercise, but you are hunting in the wrong forest entirely," explained Sherlock Holmes. He rose, his tall frame seeming to command the room, and I saw Professor Finch, from his corner, give a slow, deliberate nod of approval, a silent acknowledgment from one master of the craft to another. The dilettantes began to gather their papers, the sound a deflated, papery rustle. Holmes turned his attention to the constable, his posture straightening, his tone shifting abruptly from academic dismissal to brisk command, as if a new, more urgent case had just presented itself. "Constable, we are not in search of a historian or a cryptographer. We require a vocalist, someone with an intimate knowledge of the chapel's unique architecture and a voice of singular power and control. Has any such individual been associated with the choir of late?" Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Grimshaw furrowed his brow, a hand rubbing his chin as the fanciful theories of treasure maps evaporated before this new, practical line of inquiry. "There was one lad, a prodigious talent, they said. Young Sebastian Crowe. Dismissed from the university a year ago. A terrible business with gambling debts, as I recall," remarked Constable Grimshaw. I saw Holmes draw a sharp, quiet breath. His eyes lit with that familiar predatory gleam. The hunt was on once more. "Crow," he repeated softly, the name itself seeming to hold a world of possibility. A man with a rare gift and a desperate need. "Watson, I believe our investigation has just found its voice," Sherlock Holmes noted. With the departure of the university dons and their fantastical theories, a profound quiet settled upon the Choirmaster's office. The only sounds were the solemn ticking of a tall case clock in the corner, and the faint, papery rustle as Mr. Finchley nervously straightened a stack of sheet music. The air, thick with the scent of old leather and beeswax, hung heavy with unspoken questions. The theories of our academic friends, while imaginative, have led us precisely nowhere. Let us abandon the realm of cryptographic fantasy, Mr. Finchley, and return to the world of human motive. The chapel is a musical instrument. Who, I ask you, knew how to play it best? Sherlock Holmes said. The old choirmaster looked up, his brow furrowed in thought. He ran a trembling hand over the polished oak of his desk before speaking, his voice a low and sorrowful murmur. "Many have known its ways, Mr. Holmes, generations of boys, scholars who have studied its architecture. But to truly play it, you speak of a unique talent, a voice of singular power and precision," answered Mr. Alaric Finchley. Holmes leaned forward, his grey eyes glinting with an intensity that seemed to command the truth. The steady ticking of the clock was the only punctuation to the silence that followed. "Precisely. A singer. Not merely a good one, but an exceptional one. Someone who could produce a note so pure, so exact, that it might interact with the very stone and glass of the chapel. Has there been such a chorister in your memory? Perhaps one whose connection to the college was severed?" Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. A shadow passed over Finchley's face. He hesitated, his gaze falling to his hands. It was clear the question had touched upon a deep and painful memory. There was one, a young man named Sebastian Crow. His voice, heaven-sent. He could find resonances in the vaulting that no one else even knew existed. A prodigious, once-in-a-generation talent. Mr. Alaric Finchley replied. "And what became of him?" Dr. John Watson added. Finchley sighed, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement, heavy with profound disappointment. "He had another talent, I am sorry to say, for cards and horses. He fell into debt, deeply so. His fellowship was revoked, and he was dismissed from the university in disgrace 2 years ago. It was a great loss to music, a terrible waste," said Mr. Alaric Finchley. Holmes sat back in his chair, a flicker of triumph in his expression. He steepled his fingers, his eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the mullioned window. "And there we have it, Watson, the perfect confluence of elements. We have sought a man with a key, but the key is not a piece of metal, nor is it a cipher. The key is a human voice. Mr. Crow possesses the specific knowledge of the chapel's acoustics, the rare physical instrument required to exploit it, and, thanks to his gambling, the desperate motive to do so. A man in debt will undertake desperate measures to acquire that which he believes will save him." Sherlock Holmes noted. He rose to his feet in a single fluid motion, the energy in the room shifting with him. The quiet contemplation was over. The pursuit had begun. He turned towards the door, his purpose clear and sharp as a shard of glass. Our path is now clear. We must locate Mr. Sebastian Crow. I fancy his lodgings will prove far more illuminating than the misguided scribblings of the Dilettantes Club. Come, Watson. Our inquiries soon led us to a narrow, rickety staircase in a less than salubrious part of Cambridge. The air was thick with the scent of boiled cabbage and damp. Each step we took was answered by a weary groan from the timber beneath our feet. Our destination was the lodgings of Mr. Sebastian Crow, the disgraced chorister whose name had surfaced with such alarming frequency. He rapped his knuckles sharply upon a door at the top of the landing, the sound echoing flatly in the cramped space. Motive and opportunity are but two legs of a tripod, Watson. Now we must find the third, knowledge, remarked Sherlock Holmes. There was no reply. After a moment, Holmes produced a slender piece of wire from his pocket. With the dexterity that never failed to astonish me, he manipulated the lock. A faint click was the only protest as the door swung inward on a single, sparsely furnished room. It was the very picture of genteel poverty. A narrow bed, a simple washstand, and a small table were the only furnishings. It was the bookshelf, however, that drew my friend's immediate attention. I surveyed the bleakness of the room. Meanwhile, Holmes was already running a long, thin finger across the spines of the few volumes assembled there. He moved with a silent, predatory grace, his eyes alight with the thrill of the hunt. He plucked one book from the shelf, its leather binding cracked with age. "As I suspected," Holmes murmured, his voice low, yet filling the small room with its intensity. "Not poetry, not novels, but works of a very particular nature. See here, the architectural principles of Perpendicular Gothic, and this, a history of King's College Chapel," Sherlock Holmes responded. He opened the latter volume, his gaze sweeping across the pages. He paused, holding it out for my inspection. The chapter, entitled Anomalies and Whispers, concerned a disgraced choirmaster from the 18th century. This man, Thomas Elwood, had been dismissed for heretical theories concerning the chapel's acoustic properties. The margins of the page were filled with annotations written in a neat, urgent hand. "Good heavens, Holmes! It seems Mr. Crow has a scholarly interest in the very place from which he was expelled," Dr. John Watson said. "An interest that goes beyond mere scholarship, I fancy," he murmured, his eyes still fixed on the book. "An academic curiosity rarely drives a man to crime, but when combined with this—" He turned from the bookshelf to the small writing desk. With the tip of his cane he nudged a disorderly stack of papers. Observed Sherlock Holmes. "They were letters, Watson, and all of a most unpleasant sort. Final demands from tailors, stark threats from moneylenders, and urgent notices from bookmakers. The sum of Mr. Crow's debts was staggering, a weight that would crush a far stronger man. The papers rustled dryly as Holmes sifted through them. Here we have it, Watson, the complete tripod. A man with an intimate, almost obsessive knowledge of the chapel's secrets. A man with the unique vocal talent to exploit them. And a man hounded by creditors to the point of absolute desperation. "The picture is all but complete," Sherlock Holmes said. He placed the book back upon the shelf with careful precision, his expression hardening into one of profound concentration. The distant chime of a college bell drifted through the grimy window, marking the hour. Holmes stood motionless for a long moment, his mind clearly racing far ahead of my own. He turned to me, his grey eyes gleaming. "This room has told us all it can. The theory is sound, but theory is a fragile thing. It must be tested against the cold, hard facts of stone and air. We must leave now. I have an experiment to conduct," deduced Sherlock Holmes. I was not with Holmes on the night he returned to King's College Chapel, for his purpose was one of singular focus, which admitted no distraction. He related the events of that solitary vigil to me the following morning with a precision I shall now endeavour to replicate. He had gained entry with the Choirmaster's key, and described how the great oaken door groaned shut behind him, sealing him within a cavern of profound silence and shadow. The only light was that of the moon. It was a pale, ethereal wash spilling through the colossal fan-vaulted windows. In its glow, the stone pillars were transformed into the bleached bones of leviathans. The sharp, solitary tap of his own footsteps on the flagstones was the only sound to accompany him as he strode to the centre of the nave. There he stopped and stood for a long while, a tall, gaunt silhouette in the gloom. It was not a place for idle speculation, he told me, but for empirical test. From his pocket he produced a small steel tuning fork. A flick of his wrist against the choir stall, and a single, pure note rose into the vast emptiness. He listened with an almost painful intensity, his head cocked. He tracked the sound as it travelled up into the vaulted ceiling. There it seemed to hang for an impossibly long time before decaying into nothing. He then spoke, his voice a low murmur that seemed none the less to fill the immense space. "No, not a cryptogram. Finchley is a musician, not a mathematician. Crow is a vocalist, not a scholar of ciphers. The very means of its expression is the key. The notes themselves, the sound, that is where the secret must lie," declared Sherlock Holmes. He moved then, pacing towards the altar, his steps measured. He struck the fork again, noting this time the subtle difference in the resonance. Then, clearing his throat, he produced a note with his own voice, a low, resonant baritone hum that mirrored the fork's pitch. He held it, letting it swell, feeling the very air vibrate around him, and walked slowly back towards the entrance, humming the same note, his senses attuned to the slightest change in the chapel's response. The dissonance, the choirmaster called it hideous, a cacophony. Why compose something deliberately unmusical for a place built to glorify harmony, unless the harmony it seeks is not for the human ear? A lock is a mechanism. A key is a tool designed to operate it. What if the lock is stone and the key is sound? Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. He stopped dead midway down the nave. A sudden stillness came over him, the posture of a man upon whom a great truth has just descended. He recalled for me the sudden thrilling clarity of the thought as it formed. It pulled together every disparate thread of the case, Crow's vocal talent, the architect's known obsessions, and the strange, ugly music itself. Of course, sympathetic resonance, an obscure treatise by Chladni. I read it years ago. A specific frequency, or a combination of them, can induce a vibration in a solid object. The architect, Sir Reginald Bray, was a known eccentric, fascinated with acoustics and mechanics. He did not build a simple lock of brass and iron. He built an acoustic one. Sherlock Holmes responded. The excitement in his voice, even as he recounted it to me hours later, was palpable. He stood alone in the moonlight, the entire puzzle laid bare before his mind's eye. The stolen page was not a map, nor a code to be read. It was a key to be sung. It is an acoustic key, a precise sequence of frequencies, which, when produced at the correct focal point within this space, will cause a specific stone or mechanism to vibrate, to unlock. The genius of it is absolute. Now, the only question that remains is, where? Deduced Sherlock Holmes. His gaze, he said, was drawn first upwards into the complex, shadowy geometry of the ceiling high above. Then it fell to the patterned stones beneath his feet. The key had been identified. All that was left was to find the lock. I met Holmes the next morning within the vast and silent nave of King's College Chapel. The early light, filtered through the great stained-glass windows, cast long spectral patterns of crimson and sapphire across the stone floor. Holmes himself stood motionless upon a single grey flagstone not far from the choir stalls, his head tilted back, his gaze fixed intently upon the ceiling, where stone ribs fanned out like the delicate veins of a colossal leaf, a breathtaking canopy of intricate vaulting. The cavernous space amplified the soft scrape of my own boot heels, each step echoing a lonely report in the hallowed quiet. "Have you found something, Holmes?" remarked Dr. John Watson. He did not lower his gaze, but a thin smile touched his lips. His voice, when it came, was low and resonant, seeming to hang in the chilled air. "I have found everything, my dear Watson. Last night, my tuning fork and I had a most illuminating conversation with this chapel. The dissonant notes of the stolen music are not a cipher to be read, but a key to be sung. Standing here, upon this precise spot, the acoustic energies converge. It is the focal point," remarked Sherlock Holmes. He finally lowered his head and gestured for me to join him on the stone. From this new vantage, the ceiling indeed revealed a different aspect. Following the line of his outstretched finger, I scanned the breathtaking stone lacework above us. "Look there, Watson, the central boss of the third vault. It appears, like its fellows, to be a Tudor rose, exquisitely carved. But follow the curve of the petals on the western side, the side facing the great window. Do you see how the shadows within them are just a little darker? They are cut a fraction of an inch deeper than their counterparts. A deliberate imperfection in a work of otherwise flawless symmetry. That is our lock," Sherlock Holmes responded. It was some hours later that we found ourselves ensconced in the hushed solemnity of the college library. The air was thick with the scent of aging paper and leather binding, the only sound the gentle rustle of pages as Holmes delved into a stack of enormous vellum-bound folios. I watched him, his brow furrowed in concentration, his long fingers tracing lines of faded ink. Suddenly he emitted a short, sharp cry of triumph that made the elderly librarian at the far end of the hall look up with a start. "Ah, listen to this. The private journals of Master Reginald Ely, the chapel's architect. He was, it seems, a man of science as much as a man of God. Let any man seek to plunder this house, he writes, and he shall find its treasures guarded, not by iron, but by the very air itself. For in the fifth chord lies the key, a sympathetic resonance which shall cause the angel's heart to tremble and yield what it protects," deduced Sherlock Holmes. He closed the heavy book with a soft but decisive thud, sending a cloud of ancient dust swirling into the afternoon sunbeams. The angel's heart is his poetic name for the hollowed keystone. The fifth chord is our stolen music. He designed it during the height of the Reformation's turmoil, a sonic vault to protect the college's founding charters from seizure, a lock that requires a specific sequence of musical notes sung from a precise location to vibrate it open. A work of pure genius, Sherlock Holmes noted. Then the case is solved. We need only inform the constabulary, remarked Dr. John Watson. Holmes shook his head, his expression turning from one of intellectual satisfaction to cold, practical calculation. His voice dropped, becoming crisp and businesslike. "Far from it, Watson. We have solved the how, but not the who. The thief has the key, and he is the only one, besides ourselves, who knows of this secret. We cannot simply guard the ceiling and wait. No, we must devise a method to compel our songbird to sing his specific song, and to do so in a place of our own choosing," Sherlock Holmes said. A predatory gleam entered his eye, the look of a master strategist contemplating the moves upon a chessboard. The mystery of the architect was solved, but a new and more practical problem had presented itself, the artful trapping of a thief with a voice of gold. The next morning found us gathered in the Choirmaster's office, a room where the very air seemed heavy with the scent of old paper and beeswax. A solemn grandfather clock ticked away the seconds in the corner, its rhythm a slow and steady counterpoint to the agitated energy of my friend Holmes. He stood before the hearth, his back to the low fire, his gaze fixed on the room's other two occupants with an expression of intense concentration. "A singing competition? Mr. Holmes, with all due respect, we are investigating a burglary, not auditioning for the Royal Opera," remarked Constable Grimshaw. Constable Grimshaw, a man whose imagination extended only as far as his handcuffs, shifted his considerable bulk in a creaking wooden chair. Opposite him, the frail Mr. Finchley wrung his hands, his face a mask of bewildered anxiety. "We are doing both, Constable, for our burglar is also a singer of rare talent. Consider the problem. We suspect Mr. Sebastian Crowe. We know he has the vocal range, the knowledge of the chapel, and a desperate need for funds. But what can we prove? Nothing. A direct accusation would be met with a flat denial, and we should be no further forward," observed Sherlock Holmes. From the mantelpiece, Holmes picked up a sheet of freshly inked manuscript. Its notes were jarring and discordant, an affront to musical convention. We cannot ask him if he knows the acoustic combination to a 16th-century lock, but we can, and we shall, compel him to demonstrate his knowledge unwittingly. We must bait the trap with something he cannot resist. Sherlock Holmes noted. He turned then to the Choirmaster, his tone softening from its sharp didactic edge to one of gentle persuasion. "Mr. Finchley, I have here a transcription of the stolen music. I propose that the college announces the discovery of a lost composition, penned by the chapel's very own architect. A piece of singular historical import, and of singular difficulty." "A falsehood in these hallowed walls?" responded Mr. Alaric Finchley. The old man's voice trembled slightly, a whisper of pious horror. "A strategic ambiguity, sir, to recover a truth far more precious. You will announce a contest to perform this challenging piece. The prize must be substantial, enough to draw out a man hounded by debt. And this music, this very sequence of notes, must be the required test piece for every entrant," replied Sherlock Holmes. The brilliance of the scheme settled upon me then. Any man could enter, but only one possessed the unique combination of vocal gift and secret knowledge to perform it precisely as designed. Crow would see it as the perfect cover, a public performance that was in reality a private act of thievery. "It is irregular," Constable Grimshaw answered. The constable grumbled, though a flicker of grudging admiration had entered his eye. "The criminal mind is seldom regular, Constable. Our methods must be adaptable. Well, Mr. Finchley, will you help us catch our songbird?" observed Sherlock Holmes. The Choirmaster stared at the bizarre manuscript, then looked up at Holmes, his gaze sweeping towards the window and the magnificent fan-vaulted ceiling of the chapel visible beyond. After a long silence, punctuated only by the clock's steady beat, he gave a slow, deliberate nod. "For the chapel, for the preservation of its legacy, I will do it," Mr. Alaric Finchley answered. And so the notices were prepared, offering a handsome prize for the first successful public rendition of the Lost Canticle of the Architect. The trap was set, the bait was laid, and all that remained was to see if our quarry was clever enough and desperate enough to fly into it. King's College Chapel was a cavern of chilled stone and shadowed light. The few candles arranged for the so-called competition did little to pierce the gloom, their flames dancing in the cold draughts that whispered down from the fan-vaulted ceiling. We sat concealed in the choir stalls, the ancient oak smooth and dark beneath my hand. Beside me, Holmes was a study in stillness, his sharp profile etched against the distant glow of the altar. A tremulous whisper came from Mr. Finchley, who was fidgeting beside Constable Grimshaw. "He is the last. I pray this sacrilege bears fruit, Mr. Holmes," answered Mr. Alaric Finchley. Holmes did not turn, his voice a low murmur that barely disturbed the hallowed air. "Patience, Mr. Finchley. The songbird is about to sing for his supper," Sherlock Holmes said. As if on cue, a figure detached himself from the shadows near the nave. Sebastian Crow strode forward with an air of theatrical confidence, his footsteps echoing with sharp clarity on the flagstones. He was a handsome fellow, yet there was a hardness in his eyes that belied his youthful features. He took his place not before the organ, as the others had, but directly in the centre of the chapel, upon the precise spot Holmes had indicated. His voice, when it came, was a rich baritone that filled the vast space with ease. "I shall require no accompaniment. This piece demands a purity of tone," replied Mr. Sebastian Crow. Mr. Finchley gasped, a small scandalized sound. To sing such a composition a cappella was unheard of. Crow took a deep breath, tilted his head back, and from his lips poured the most extraordinary sequence of notes I have ever heard. It was not music, but rather a structured, resonant assault upon the senses, a series of discordant yet immensely powerful tones that seemed to vibrate not in the ear, but in the very bones. Each note was precise, sustained, and seemed aimed directly at the ceiling high above us. I glanced at Holmes. His eyes were narrowed, his entire being focused upon a single carved boss amongst the intricate lacework of stone overhead. The air grew thick with the sound, the strange melody building in intensity. Crow's control was masterful. He was not merely singing, he was performing a complex technical operation with his voice as the instrument. "Now, Watson," he breathed, his voice tight with anticipation. "Observe," Sherlock Holmes said. As Crow held a final, piercingly high and unnatural note, a new sound entered the chapel. It was faint at first, a low and gritty protest, like a millstone stirring uneasily in its sleep. I strained my ears, discerning a faint grinding of stone upon stone, emanating from the very spot Holmes was watching. The sound was utterly alien to that sacred place, a mechanical intrusion disturbing centuries of silence. Even Grimshaw heard it, his gruff voice a low rumble. "What in heaven's name was that?" answered Constable Grimshaw. The note from Crow's throat finally ceased, and the ensuing silence was profound, almost deafening. But the grinding continued for a moment longer, culminating in a single sharp click that echoed from the vaulted heights like the snapping of a lock. Every eye in the chapel was now turned upwards, staring into the oppressive darkness of the ceiling, waiting. The final, dissonant note of Crow's performance hung in the frigid air, an unnatural echo in that sacred space. The grinding from above, a protest of stone against stone, ceased as abruptly as it had begun. High in the celestial tracery of the fan vaulting, a section of carved stone slid back, revealing a cavity as black and absolute as a starless night. Every gaze was drawn to it. His voice was a low, urgent murmur, cutting through the tense silence. "Now, Constable, be ready," stated Sherlock Holmes. Sebastian Crow stood transfixed, his face upturned, a mask of greedy triumph, illuminated by the faint chancel lamps. He saw his deliverance in that dark hole. Then a shape detached itself from the blackness, small, dense, tumbling end over end, whistling softly as it cleaved the air in its rapid descent. There was no crash upon the ancient flagstones. Instead, the object landed with a solid, fleshy thud. Constable Grimshaw, positioned by Holmes with uncanny foresight, caught the falling prize in his large hands, staggering back a single step from the impact. He grunted with the effort, his voice a breathless wheeze. "Good heavens, Mr. Holmes, it weighs a ton," responded Constable Grimshaw. It was a small chest, no larger than a shoebox, fashioned from dark, aged wood and bound with tarnished iron straps. Crow's triumphant expression curdled into one of disbelief and horror as he saw his treasure, not at his own feet, but in the very arms of the law. He took a half-step forward, a predatory glint in his eye, before freezing in place. Holmes did not even glance at him. "Open it, Constable. Let us see what the chapel's founder deemed worthy of such an ingenious lock." Sherlock Holmes responded. With fumbling fingers, Grimshaw worked the heavy iron latch. It groaned in protest, echoing the grinding of the stone above, before giving way. I leaned in, my own heart thumping with anticipation. Yet inside there was no glint of gold, no sparkle of gemstones. A dry, musty scent of antiquity rose to meet us. The constable lifted out not a bag of coins, but a bundle of vellum manuscripts, tied with a ribbon so faded it was nearly white. His voice was flat, utterly deflated. "Paper. It is nothing but old paper," Constable Grimshaw said. A strangled gasp escaped Sebastian Crow, the sound of a man watching his future evaporate into dust. His shoulders slumped, the colour drained from his face, and the last vestige of his defiant posture vanished, leaving him a hollowed-out man. Holmes finally turned his piercing gaze upon the former chorister. His tone was not accusatory, but rather that of a scholar confirming a hypothesis. The personal diary of Elias Thorne, the disgraced choirmaster of 1788. Am I correct? I imagine his forgotten writings on harmonic sympathy proved most instructive, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. Holmes's specificity shattered Crow's last defences. He looked up, his eyes wide with the shock of a man whose very thoughts had been laid bare. His confession tumbled out, not in a rush, but as a weary, defeated whisper, wholly inadequate in the vastness of the chapel. How could you possibly know? Yes, it was his diary. I found it by chance in the college archives, a dusty folio no one had opened in a century. He wrote of the founder's great fear of fire and plunder, and of this acoustic lock he commissioned to guard the chapel's true legacy. The dissonant music was the only key, Mr. Sebastian Crow said. And the legacy, observed Sherlock Holmes. His voice cracked with the ghost of his lost fortune. The founding charters, the architect's original annotated plans, they are priceless to a historian. A private collector in Amsterdam, he had promised me a sum that would solve all my problems. My debts, said Mr. Sebastian Crow. His words trailed off. The vast, holy silence of King's College Chapel pressed in, magnifying the sordidness of his ambition. Constable Grimshaw, who had been staring at the vellum with newfound reverence, slowly looked up. He drew himself to his full height, his expression now one of grim duty, and cleared his throat, the small sound echoing from the stone floor. His voice was firm and carried clearly in the still air. Sebastian Crow, on the matter of the theft from this chapel, I am placing you under arrest, answered Constable Grimshaw. In the profound silence that followed Crow's confession, the truth seemed to hang in the very air of the chapel, as tangible as the scent of old stone and wax. The priceless founding documents, rescued from their centuries of slumber, lay upon the dark wood of a choir stall. Their parchment was a stark contrast to the modern spectacle of a crime laid bare. Mr. Crow stood with his head bowed, a figure of utter defeat amidst the grandeur. "Well, I'll be hanged," Constable Grimshaw replied. Constable Grimshaw's voice was a low rumble of pure astonishment, the sound utterly out of place in that sacred space. He shook his head slowly, his gaze shifting from the recovered chest to the disgraced former chorister. He drew a pair of steel handcuffs from his coat. The sharp, metallic click of their unlocking echoed from the fan-vaulted ceiling, a final, percussive note to the affair. "Sebastian Crow, you are under arrest for the theft of property belonging to this college. You needn't say anything, but there is nothing left to say. I have sung my last note in this place," Mr. Sebastian Crow said. Crow's reply was devoid of all emotion. He offered his wrists without resistance. As the constables secured the cuffs, the young man who had unlocked the chapel's greatest secret was led away, his footsteps receding down the stone aisle until the great oak door groaned shut behind him. For a long moment, only the sound of Mr. Finchley's quiet, shuddering breaths remained. The Founder's Charter, his personal missal. "I cannot, Mr. Holmes. How can the college ever repay you?" Mr. Alaric Finchley replied. The old choirmaster's voice trembled with a joy so profound it was akin to pain. He reached out a palsied hand, not to touch the documents, but merely to hover over them, as if warming himself by a fire. Before my friend could reply, Grimshaw returned, having seen his prisoner off to a subordinate, and cleared his throat. "Begging your pardon, Mr. Holmes, but I still don't take the half of it. Ciphers and codes I understand, but this is something else entirely. How did you move from a missing sheet of music to all this?" answered Constable Grimshaw. Holmes turned from the altar, a faint didactic light in his eyes, and gestured towards the magnificent organ that dominated the western end of the chapel. "Because, Constable, you persisted in viewing it as a problem of cryptography, when it was, in fact, a problem of physics. As his private notes in the library attest, the architect of this chapel was a pioneer in the study of acoustics. He understood that every object possesses a natural frequency at which it will vibrate," deduced Sherlock Holmes. He paced slowly before us, his voice crisp and clear, each word finding its own perfect echo. "It is a principle known as sympathetic resonance. Produce a sound of a precise frequency, and you can cause a corresponding object, a wine glass, a bridge, or a series of hidden tumblers within stone, to vibrate in response. The stolen music was not a melody to be enjoyed, nor a code to be deciphered. It was a key, an acoustic key," replied Sherlock Holmes. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle upon us. Finchley and Grimshaw stared, utterly captivated. Those dissonant, jarring notes were a unique combination of frequencies. When played upon that specific C-sharp pipe of the organ and at the correct pressure, they generated a resonance. That resonance, in turn, tripped the ancient lock mechanism hidden within the paneling. The architect had built a lock that could only be opened by a song, a most elegant and, until now, a most perfect security. Sherlock Holmes noted. Mr. Finchley looked from Holmes to the organ, and then to the empty compartment, his face a mask of dawning wonder. The recovery of the lost history was one miracle. The revelation of the genius that had concealed it was another entirely. So the music! It was the voice that spoke to the stone itself. My heavens! Responded Mr. Alaric Finchley. Precisely. And now, gentlemen, if you will excuse us, I feel the damp of this place in my bones, and have a considerable amount of notation to complete on the matter. A case of this nature must be properly catalogued. Sherlock Holmes responded. With a curt nod, he turned towards the exit. As we stepped from the cool, echoing dark of the chapel into the fading light of the Cambridge evening, I saw that the thrill of the chase had already left him. His mind was already at work. He was arranging the facts and principles of the case into the precise, ordered archive that would become the foundation of his life's work. The return to our modest lodgings on Montague Street felt as profound as our departure from the hallowed halls of King's College. The grand echoes of the chapel organ were replaced by familiar sounds, the crackle of the hearth fire, the rhythmic clatter of a hansome's hoofs on wet cobblestones. A thin London mist pressed against the window panes, blurring the gaslight into a soft golden haze. For a full hour, the only sound in the room was the steady scratching of my companion's pen. Sherlock Holmes sat hunched over his writing desk, his brow furrowed in concentration. The lamplight cast his sharp, aquiline features into stark relief. This was not mere writing, it was an act of intellectual preservation. He distilled the strange affair of the Chorister's cipher into a neat, factual account. He worked with fierce precision, cross-referencing notes from his journal and adding marginalia with swift, decisive strokes. I watched him, content in our quiet companionship, and marvelled at the singular focus of the man. At last, he set down his pen with a faint sigh of satisfaction and leaned back in his chair, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin. He looked not at me, but into the dancing flames, his mind still turning over the peculiar facets of the case. It is a most satisfactory little problem, Watson, a perfect example of the fallibility of conventional thought. To Constable Grimshaw it was a stolen sheet of paper. To Mr. Finchley, a lost piece of musical heritage. They looked, but they did not observe. Sherlock Holmes noted. His voice was low and resonant, the quiet intensity of a lecturer addressing a favoured pupil. They sought a cipher for the eye, a hidden message in the notation. Yet they failed to consider that a chapel, a great stone vessel, is not merely a building. It is an instrument. Every arch, every vault, every pane of glass is designed to manipulate sound. The architect was no mere stonemason. He was a master of acoustics. His lock was not built of brass and steel, but of sympathetic resonance, observed Sherlock Holmes. He rose from his chair and moved towards a large ledger on a side table. It was the beginning of his now famous index, a vast catalogue of knowledge he believed pertinent to the detection of crime. He picked up his pen once more and dipped it in the inkwell. With painstaking care, he inscribed a new heading upon a virgin page. The world is full of obvious things, Watson, things which nobody ever observes. Young Crow knew the chapel's secrets because he had lived within its voice. He understood the key because he possessed the instrument, his own vocal cords, to turn it. Our good constable could have stared at that sheet music for 1,000 years and seen nothing but a discordant melody, replied Sherlock Holmes. He carefully blotted the ink. his movements economical and precise. He took the pages containing his complete account of the investigation and filed them neatly behind the newly lettered tab. This one shall be the foundational entry under a new and vital heading: Acoustics and Architecture. It proves that no branch of knowledge is so obscure that it cannot be turned to a practical purpose in this work of ours. Every great building has its secrets, Watson. One must simply learn how to listen, declared Sherlock Holmes. He closed the great ledger with a soft thud that seemed to punctuate the end of the affair. I looked at him, standing amidst his burgeoning files and chemical experiments. He was surrounded by the papers that documented the dark underbelly of our city. In that moment, I felt I was witnessing the birth of something entirely new. This was not merely a hobby, but a science, a profession forged in the crucible of logic. And I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones. The case of the Chorister's cipher was but the first of many strange and wonderful overtures we should experience together.